Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. Astronauts have some extravehicular activity on today's agenda, a 3.5-hour spacewalk, postponed from last Tuesday because of various problems. Steve Young reports from CBS News Space Headquarters in New York.
During the walk, Skylab Commander Alan Bean remains the odd man in. He stays inside the pattern workshop while Jack Lousma and Owen Garriott go walk outside, and technically speaking, each astronaut then himself becomes a satellite of the Earth. When the astronauts reached the space station, they noticed the sunshade erected by the last crew appeared to be waving in the breeze caused by their rocket blasts. The first task for Garriott and Lousma is to erect a more durable sunshade, which they carried up with them. Officials have been concerned that the sun's baking heat may have damaged the first umbrella. Then, before they go back inside, the crew will insert film cassettes in the Apollo telescope mount, which photographs the sun. They'll also check the outside plumbing of the cooling system, which developed a leak last night. It isn't likely to seriously affect this mission, but might force an early launch of the third group of astronauts scheduled to man Skylab. 2 more spacewalks are scheduled during this mission to change film again and to retrieve the last batch. Steve Young, CBS News Space Headquarters, New York.
CBS News, Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Probe, the third in 3 weeks. The latest unmanned spacecraft should reach the vicinity of Mars next March. The Soviet news agency TASS says it's carrying equipment to test the sun's radio emissions, solar plasma, and cosmic rays. More news in a moment.
Astronauts have been given the go-ahead for their spacewalk. Astronauts Garriott and Lousma making the final checks of their spacesuits before stepping out of the workshop for a busy 4-hour assignment, looking for leaks, fixing a new sunshade, and loading up film for the Skylab experiments.
At the tune, 1 p.m.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Preparing to erect a new sunshade and to see if they can find a leak in the radiator system. They went out the airlock about half an hour ago, 60 minutes behind schedule. L. Patrick Gray told us.
This is news from American Contemporary Radio. I'm Joe Templeton in Washington. Some figures can... A couple of astronauts are now in the midst of a spacewalk. Jack Lousma was the first to go out of the hatch. Lousma described the view to Owen Garriott.
It's pretty out here, incidentally. It's beautiful, as a matter of fact. Wow, what a view. You know, I get out of the way, I could look. I'll give you just a minute, I'll be out there.
Garriott then followed Lousma outside where they went to work setting up a new sunshade. The astronauts will also change the film in some cameras and check on some leaks in the air conditioning system. The spacewalk is scheduled to last about 3.5 hours. At the tune, 2 p.m.
CBS News, Douglas Edwards reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts Owen Garriott and Jack Lousma are spacewalking now, with Commander Alan Bean staying inside. The walk started about an hour late, and the men are now wrestling with the intricacies of a new sunshade which they must erect. The astronauts will also try to find the source of a leak in the Skylab's cooling system.
Lousma and Owen Garriott have been outside Skylab for over an hour now. The Skylab astronauts are putting fresh film into Skylab's cameras and will also put up a new space awning. First, they didn't...
3 p.m. in time for CBS News.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Jack Lousma and Owen Garriott have fallen far behind the timeline as Garriott struggles to put together 2 long poles which form the frame for a new workshop sunshade. From inside the laboratory, Alan Bean describes the difficulty to mission control.
Now, it's just taking time, and it looks like he's going to get it. I suggested one alternative, which doesn't sound too good, but it's a possibility in case he gets tired. Namely, come back in the lock, bring the poles in, repress the lock, cut the plastic with the scissors, depress the lock, go out and finish the job. but Owen seems to think he's going to have it made. It's just going to take a little bit longer than he thought.
And at last report, the astronauts had one of those long poles put together and in place. More news in a minute.
4 p.m.
CBS News, Douglas Edwards reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts Garriott and Lausma still outside their orbiting spacecraft, having fallen behind schedule for their first task of erecting that new sunshade.
Problems include the malfunctioning of 2 of the Apollo spacecraft jet thrusters, a leak of air conditioning fluid, and wiring problems. Skylab 2 has had so many problems that Flight Director Charles Lewis said today in his words, "I have the feeling somebody doesn't like us. This is like a simulation where they try to bring you to your knees with problems. It just doesn't seem real." A mistaken bombing of a camera.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Garriott began a long spacewalk 4.5 hours ago, and it's believed they're still out there. Their first job, to install a new protective sunshade over the workshop, proved more difficult than they thought. They had trouble extending 2 poles that form the masts of the sunshade, and then they had more trouble unfurling the shade itself. From inside the laboratory, Alan Bean assured Mission Control the men were working slowly and carefully, and it was apparent they would be outside a record length of time. They have several experiments to retrieve or replenish, film to replace in the telescope mount, a short circuit to investigate there, 2 major problems to inquire into. 1, a leak in the cooling system, and 2, the rocket thrusters on their own command ship, the things that caused such alarms late last week. The Soviet Union revealed the launching of another Mars probe today. Launched yesterday, it joins 2 others that left for Mars last month. There's speculation now the first 2 may be put into orbit about that distant planet, while the probe launched yesterday may attempt a soft landing. The first probe should arrive in the vicinity of Mars in February. The Garriott have spent a good part of the day in the first spacewalk in this team of Skylab astronauts. Reed Collins reports from CBS News Space Headquarters in New York. The 2 astronauts eclipsed previous Skylab spacewalks partly because of the difficulty they had setting up a sun shield to replace the parasol left by the workshop's first occupants. They had difficulty assembling 2 long poles that formed the framework of the shield, and then they ran into trouble unfolding the sail-like shield itself. Added problems have added to the spacewalk chores. Mission Control is hoping the EDA might uncover the source of leaks in the cooling system, which threaten to shorten the manned usefulness of the entire laboratory. The spacewalkers are expected also to get some visual examinations of the suspect rocket thrusters in the craft that got them up there, and is the only means whereby they can get back, pending the readiness of the rescue rocket at Cape Kennedy. All in all, a busy day in space. Reed Collins, CBS News Space Headquarters, New York.
News is next in sound from CBS, followed by news from the KLBJ newsroom. The time at the tone, 8 o'clock.
CBS News, Mitchell Krause reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Spacemen have ended a record-setting first walk in the void. Reed Collins reports.
For 6 hours and 31 minutes, the astronauts labored to rig a new sunshade over the workshop area, a sail held in place by 2 long poles. They replaced the film in the solar telescope and retrieved or replaced items in 3 other standing experiments. Then Lausma went troubleshooting. He was asked to see if he could find evidence of refrigerant leaking. He could not. He was asked to see if he could find some evidence of an electrical short near the telescope mount, and he could not. Lausma made his way back to look at the command ship and the rocket quads that caused the alarms of last week. He reported they appear to be pitted. Occasionally, the outside men, Garriott and Lausma, would look at the earth slipping beneath them, and during night-side passes looked at the moon and the running lights of the big ship and waited for the sun for the active work. EVA lasting nearly twice as long as planned. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
And will resume their interior functions. At least one more spacewalk is scheduled before the end of the 59-day mission in September.
At least for the moment, the problems that threatened to cut short this Skylab mission appear to have been contained. More in a moment.
Harriet and Lausma are back in the Skylab after a record spacewalk that lasted just over 6.5 hours. The astronauts installed a new sunshade on Skylab and inspected damage to it and the Apollo ship.
Fort Dallas, 9 o'clock.
NBC News on the Hour, a record spoke for Southern Californians. This is David Rush. Skylab astronauts Garriott and Lausma are back inside the space station after a 6.5-hour spacewalk. It's the longest period the spaceman has spent outside. Astronauts put up a new sunshade and replaced film in the solar telescope cameras, but they could find no clues to help engineers on the ground solve the problems of possible leaking coolant, damaged wires from a short circuit, or the steering rockets which have been leaking fuel. Space officials at Houston later said the problems are not as serious as first feared. Southern California.
CBS News, Gary Shepard reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts are back inside their orbiting space station following a spacewalk that lasted for 6.5 hours. They managed to put up a new sun shield, but they failed to find any fuel leaks. Now this message.
This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. In store for Skylab after yesterday's record-breaking extravehicular activity, reported now by Reed Collins. The spacewalk had lasted nearly twice as long as planned, 6 hours, 31 minutes by Alan Bean's watch, but there was more to do. The new sunshade, a sail-like device, was difficult to put in place, but once there, it began to cool the workshop almost instantly. The men retrieved and replaced film in the solar telescope, and they adjusted 3 other outside experiments requiring long-term exposure to space. Jack Lausma looked for evidence of coolant leaking, the latest Skylab cause for alarm. He couldn't find any. Nor could he find outside evidence of an electrical short. He went back to check last week's alarm, the rocket quads on the command ship module. The suspect quads, he reported, appeared to be pitted. At times, the EVA lights were not fully on, and Lausma would hang there on the dark side of Earth, seeing only the moon and the little light on his own life support system. By command from the ground, those lights finally were turned on. Once back inside, the crew summed up this long spacewalk with the simple phrase, "We got it all done." Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters in New York. 5 minutes, I'll see you on KBUK-AM one more time.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour...
And the next one stand a good chance of being completed as planned. From the World Desk of United Press International, this is Roger Norum.
It's time now for the KWED Noon Report, beginning with news from United Press International in New York, brought to you 12 noon.
From the World Desk of United Press International, this is Roger Norum.
University have developed a rechargeable heart pacemaker, which they say could stay implanted in a patient for many decades. The new pacemaker will be charged right through the chest with a portable device. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average at this hour is down 1.35 on a volume 8,380,000 shares. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
At the tone, 2 p.m., time for CBS News.
CBS News, Douglas Edwards reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is John Grimes in New York, and at this hour...
At the tone, 5 p.m.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. It's got a good record of the explosive nature of the sun today. A large flare developed on the sun disk as Owen Garriott was operating the solar telescopes. We were sitting right square on the spot at the time of the event, Garriott reported. Inside the workshop, the spider named Arabella got busy and began spinning a new web today, apparently adjusting to the weightless and insectless environment she happens to be in. More in a minute.
It's 6 o'clock, news time.
Here's news of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour, midnight. Here's news of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. Astronauts today appear comfortably settled into their orbital routine, and NASA officials, looking back on a whole series of technical problems and physical ailments, think the worst may be over. Alan Bean, Owen Garriott, and Jack Lausma are planning a full day of experiments, making use of solar telescopes, medical devices, and Earth resources photosensors. Bean, the flight commander, indicates that he and his colleagues are having to spend a fair amount of time on strictly domestic matters. He says it's just fantastic, the total amount of housekeeping they have to do.
p.m.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The World Tonight, Wednesday, August 8th. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS. Officials in Houston report that the Skylab astronauts have become thoroughly adapted to weightlessness, and right now they're just as healthy as the previous crew was at the same point in the mission. Astronauts Bean, Garriott, and Lausma have now been in space for 12 days, and they have completely recovered from their early motion sickness. What's more, they're in excellent spirits. The center says the only lasting effect of their recent illness has been a 5-pound loss of weight in each astronaut.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour, it's beginning another day of experiments, but the fourth member of the space crew apparently worked throughout the night. One of the workshop experiments involves a little spider named Arabella, whose job is to spin a web, if she can, without Earth gravity as a guide. Science pilot Owen Garriott radioed a report down to Houston this morning on Arabella's progress.
That she learned very rapidly in zero-G without the benefit of any previous experience, and simply working on her own, she figured out a very nice solution to the problems of zero gravity.
The astronauts turned their attention from that spider web to the northeastern U.S. today, photographing the effects of strip mining.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Newfoundland, from Nantua, France, from Kazakhstan, Central Asia, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Earth here below. Today's activity including an Earth Resources photo sweep from Upper Montana to Cherry Point, North Carolina, and on into the Atlantic. There's farming disasters. Soviet agriculturalists were hoping to bring in a buffer wheat crop this year. The outlook in Soviet Kazakhstan, biggest of all the Soviet agricultural republics, said to have been especially bright. But now the abundance of wheat apparently leads to new problems. The Kremlin reports that overworked wheat combines, farm trucks, and grain threshers are breaking down in droves. In Kazakhstan alone, we hear more than 14,000 disabled combines, these representing nearly 1/7 of all Soviet combines. Badly needed right now, or millions and millions of bushels of wheat could be lost forever. The World Tonight, Thursday, August 9th. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Him with his programming.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour, astronauts are taking their first day off. During their first 2 weeks in orbit, a combination of technical troubles and illness kept them busy every day.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. Tonight, Friday, August 10th. The producer is Richard Carlson. Director, Steve Warren. Technical supervision by Robert Lee and Gail Williams. Have a good weekend.
CBS News. This is Ann Crosman reporting on the CBS Radio Network. It's easy today for the first time in 2 weeks. On advice from Mission Control, they turned their cameras on the sun to get photographs of a great gas eruption bigger than the Earth's mass. One scientist calling it the explosion, a magnificent specimen of its type that happens only 2 or 3 times a year. The 3 crew members also did some housekeeping chores, and then, as we hear from Commander Alan Beam talking with Mission Control, they moved some of the food to more convenient places.
No scheduled storage change. 7 apples range from E548 to the wardroom where we'll drink them. 3 peaches moved to the wardroom out of 550 where we'll eat them. And some strawberries strawberry drinks moved from 550, 2 of them. And a couple from other places, and I'll give you that data later.
This afternoon, the men took their first showers.
CBS World News is next, followed by KLBJ Local News. The time at the tone will be exactly 9 a.m.
CBS News. Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
CBS News, good morning. This is Steve Young reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Are up and at 'em again today in their 3rd week aboard the space station. It's more of the same if whirling clear around the Earth every 93 minutes can be said to be routine. They're using scientific instruments to check resources on the Earth. Astronaut Alan Bean this morning couldn't help but be impressed during a conversation with the ground.
Big door coming open. There's a big moon right out there. Heck, we did Litter Cal right now. It's a nice full moon out there, Houston. It's a beauty. Right in the window. I bet that looks clear through that big picture window there. It does. That's a beauty. Nice planet right next to it. I wonder which one that is.
The space station has now been orbiting the Earth for 90 days.
Nine o'clock.
On the hour, David Rush reporting. It will take long to find 4 more bodies with a sophisticated gear. Now the number of recovered bodies is 27. Meanwhile, the main character in the case, 17-year-old Wayne Henley, went into Houston court, where his attorney introduced several motions, including one to keep Henley in a cell, away from other prisoners.
He tells me that the other prisoners had verbally harassed him, called him all kind of names, and cursed him and abused him. And are you worried about his safety? No, I think it's still for her to do his job in that regard.
The judge hearing that motion agreed. Henley is being kept isolated. This is Don Watson in Houston.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour, another Skylab rocket is on its way out of the launch pad at Cape Kennedy. Technicians began rolling the rocket out of its hangar this morning for possible use as a rescue ship for the Skylab astronauts now in orbit. Officials are expected to announce this afternoon whether the astronauts will try to make the return to Earth in their own command ship.
Craft that could be used if the Skylab 2 crew gets into any further trouble is moving to a launch pad at Cape Kennedy today. Space agency officials say they feel certain the rescue effort will not be necessary and that the ship can be used for the routine Skylab 3 mission.
Here's news of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour...
This is WBAP, Fort Worth, Dallas. It's 10 o'clock.
NBC News on the Hour. United States warplanes are making their final series of strikes in Cambodia before the bombing halt 1 hour from now. I'm Mark Henry.
Have now been given the go-ahead for a full 59-day mission, and they have asked for more work aboard the space station, even if it means cutting back on their sleep periods. Astronauts Bean, Garriott, and Lausma report in addition that 1 out of 50 minnow eggs aboard Skylab hatched during the night.
$10.
NBC News on the Hour. President Nixon tells the nation he is innocent of any complicity in the Watergate affair. I'm Jack Weldon.
2 p.m.
CBS News. Douglas Edwards reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Has tentatively scheduled the launch of the final Skylab mission for November 9th. This will give the astronauts a rare close-up view of the Kohoutek comet, one which scientists have dubbed the Comet of the Century. It will have maybe 50 times the brilliance of the famed Halley's Comet, and will be visible in December and January. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Washington, from Indochina, from outer space, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. But first, this message.
Skylab 3 is set for November 9th. In order to give our trio of astronauts a real close-up of what may be the brightest comet to light up the heavens in this century. The newly found comet is named Kohoutek, after its discoverer, Dr. Kohoutek, of the Hamburg Observatory. It will pass about 80 million miles away from us in December and January. It's expected to present a spectacular display in the skies, possibly as good or better than the red ball and flaming tail of Halley's Comet, which scared the daylights out of some of my friends back in 1910, and so long until tomorrow. Listen again tomorrow evening for Lowell Thomas and the news. This broadcast came to you from CBS News.
Less than 24 hours after President Nixon delivered his Watergate speech, his administration came in for criticism by leaders of the conservative wing of his own political party.
The time 5 p.m. and time for CBS News.
CBS News. This is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Fully suited and fed oxygen through a long umbilical cord, a cord which he said interfered with operations. Now this.
3 divers sailed into harbor today at Fairhaven, Massachusetts, and acknowledged failure in their efforts to salvage $2 million worth of valuables from the Andrea Doria, the Italian liner that went down in the Atlantic in 1956. The divers said the operation was too dangerous. That's The World Tonight, Friday, August 17th. The producer is Richard Carlson, director Steve Warren, technical supervisors Robert Lee and Richard Roos. Have a good weekend. This is Richard C. Hottelet, CBS News.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Washington, from Khartoum, the Sudan, from LeGrand, Oregon, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody.
Astronauts got up early this morning to photograph and televise a tropical depression near Cuba. It was supposed to be their day off, and Alan Bean and Owen Garriott went back to bed after the work was finished.
aptly named Brenda in advance of official hurricane status, is boiling up in the Caribbean this afternoon, about 100 miles southwest of Key West, Florida. The Skylab astronauts interrupted what was to be a day off for them to get still photos of Brenda's birth. But Mission Commander Alan Bean also decided to use the orbiting workshop's TV camera as well, explaining that one of the advantages of manned spaceflight is to provide a quick look at something while it's happening. Paraguay.
On 5 p.m. CBS News, David Jackson reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Building up force off the western tip of Cuba, the prediction from the National Hurricane Center in Miami is that she will rapidly grow to at least minimal hurricane force. Presently, Brenda's winds are clocked at 45 miles per hour. They are expected to build to 75 miles per hour hurricane force sometime tomorrow morning.
From the World Desk of United Press International, this is Brian McFadden. Miles off the coast of Key West, Florida, and rapidly approaching hurricane strength.
Time is 9 a.m.
CBS News. Good morning. Neil Strasser reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts who've been reporting on Brenda's movements and sending back television pictures from their vantage point in space.
Was photographed today by Skylab 2 astronauts as they passed above the coast of Mexico. That followed a period of time off from their usual work routine, as Roy Neal reports. This is the first time we've ever seen a haircut in space.
Wow. That's what's going on. Here's Captain Alan Bean, who is the leader of this mob. Every mob has a leader. And distinguished professor and mad scientist Owen Garriott trimming his hair. Well, I can see it's not going to be a professional job, but there's no waiting and the price is right.
The haircutting over, the astronauts relaxed with some unusual acrobatics.
We can do stunts up here that gymnasts and acrobats and divers have never been able to do on Earth. Let's try it.
Jack Lausma did a high dive from the extreme top of the workshop, a combination of jackknives and half-gamers. Owen Garriott demonstrated the art of swimming through air. He started out with almost no real motion and kind of wiggled his way along. As far as we know, there's not going to be any big scientific payoff from these exercises. They're just a way for the astronauts to relax on their day off. Roy Neal, NBC News, Houston.
CBS News, Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Alan Bean and Jack Lausma today were asked to take a look at the fires from high overhead.
The Earth is not situated exactly right for these windows at the moment, Story. And in addition to that, of course, like you said, it's still dark here. Okay, we thought maybe the fires would look a little brighter during the nighttime. Are we close to the tropical storm now, Story? About a minute and a half away from it. Jack thinks he has it in sight. Okay, Story, we got it on TV now. It's a good picture. It's somewhat in the distance, but it's quite well defined from this distance, more so than it was yesterday.
That tropical storm the astronauts were looking at is the one named Brenda. It may reach hurricane strength this afternoon. This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The World Tonight, Monday, August 20th. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News. From New Orleans, from Vientiane, Laos, from Moscow, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas.
Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Televised look at Tropical Storm Brenda today as it swept over the Gulf of Mexico, and they reported the storm gaining strength. Brenda has reached hurricane force tonight and is heading for Veracruz and the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Palm Springs, California was also hit by a no-name hurricane early today, with 75-mile-an-hour winds and bolts of lightning knocking out power lines, causing several fires. No injuries reported.
Astronauts focused their energies today on air conditioning problems, but after hours of troubleshooting, the leak could not be found. Dennis Williams out at NASA gave us further details.
Today was the 24th day of the planned 59-day second Skylab mission. Alan Bean spent most of the day today inspecting one of the systems for removing moisture from the Skylab atmosphere. A leak in the system was first noticed on July 30th, just 2 days after the Skylab crew entered the orbiting space station. Commander Bean said his careful inspection, using a stethoscope and covering possible leaking connections with soap, showed no leaks at all. Meanwhile, a separate dehumidifying system in another section of the space station is carrying the load.
Jack Lausma's assignment to check another air conditioning problem was canceled today. The astronauts took time out to beam to Earth televised pictures of Hurricane Brenda's progress across the Gulf of Mexico.
Super kicker, and we're keeping it all country. All
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour...
will leave the leaks in their dehumidifying system to their own devices today as they turn their attention elsewhere. They looked yesterday but were unable to find the leaks. This time the crew will take pictures of an African swamp and South America. The jet-propelled backpack will get another try as well.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening. I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The World Tonight, Tuesday, August 21st. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Stockholm, from Cozumel, Yucatan, from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Astronauts were again shooting the sun, along the way discovering a huge bubble in the sun's corona, or outer atmosphere, said to be about 3/4 as big as the sun itself. Apparently the result of an explosion, a solar flare on the backside of the sun. Space officials say the most interesting, dynamic event yet viewed by the Skylab 2 astronauts.
Today photographed a phenomenon described as the most significant solar event of their mission. It was a giant bubble in the sun's outer atmosphere caused by an explosion on the backside of the sun. Mission Commander Alan Bean described the bubble as being about 3/4 the size of the sun itself. The next major project for Bean and fellow astronauts Owen Garriott and Jack Lausma is a spacewalk scheduled for Friday, the 2nd of the mission. Flight controllers have asked the men to replace part of their vital stabilization system, 6 of the spaceship's 9 gyros. There is a possibility of the failure of one of the devices in one of the 3 axes in which the orbiting laboratory lies.
This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
We'll continue on a routine watch of the sun, and we'll check out a leak in the Skylab cooling system.
United Press International, this is Walt Wheeler. Good morning.
is excited about the good film of a solar prominence taken recently. The solar eruption is called enormous. Examination of the prominence is expected to give us more information about our own atmosphere. We are preparing for a spacewalk Friday. They will replace one of the gyros used to keep things on an even keel during the mission.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. And that's The World Tonight, Wednesday, August 22nd. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Thomas brings the news. From San Clemente, from Vera Sigri Glacier, Indian Himalayas, from Kenai Peninsula, Alaska, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody.
Information Radio in New York with World Wrap-Up, the sounds of the news on this Wednesday, August 22nd, 1973. In the top of the news, Rogers steps down. The president speaks out on Watergate. The court battle over the tapes. We'll have those and other stories in a moment.
CBS News, Mitchell Krause reporting on the CBS radio network. Today, the American Skylab astronauts were given the go-ahead for at least another 9 days in space. That would make their flight the longest in U.S. space history.
Here's news of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Crashed and burned in an open field today, critically injuring former Apollo astronaut Fred Hayes, Jr. Hayes was flying the plane from Angleton to the Galveston airport when the plane's engine apparently stalled. The plane narrowly missed a Mobile home park and crashed into a deserted field. The right wing of the aircraft was broken off by the impact. Hayes served as the lunar module pilot on the near-tragic flight of Apollo 13 in April 1970. An explosion in the oxygen system forced the spacecraft to return home without landing on the moon as planned. Hayes at this time is in critical condition but stable, with burns over 50% of his body, including his face, hands, and legs. America's Skylab astronauts boned up on their homework today for their spacewalk this Friday. Astronaut Alan Bean today described to newsmen what they plan to do during their spacewalk.
Jack and Owen will be the two fellas that go out. I'll stay in here. Jack will go out in part of a daylight path and reconnoiter both of the areas, make sure that he can get to both of the areas, and that the connectors, in fact, look like we've trained on. Then that'll end that day path. He'll come back. We'll get the rest of the gear out that night, and then when the day starts, he'll go out and attach both ends of the rate gyro EVA cable.
The astronauts are going to install a set of gyroscopes outside their orbiting laboratory. Rookie astronauts Owen Garriott and Jack Lausma are scheduled to do that and other jobs on Commander Bean's suggestion.
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with a CBS World News Roundup.
Hospital in Galveston. His plane crashed while he was attempting a landing at Shoals Field at Galveston late yesterday. The 39-year-old ex-astronaut was attempting to land a BT-13, a World War II single-engine trainer, a Vultee vibrator. It belonged to the Confederate Air Force. Hayes told hospital officials as he was being treated that the engine quit on him as he was in the pattern. He rode the plane to the ground and walked away from the crash and the fire that followed. A hospital spokesman said Hayes received second-degree burns over 50% of his body.
Ken Krinsky, that story coming up.
Fred Hayes, Jr. was involved in a plane crash last
as he was trying to land a World War II training plane at Shoals. His hospital tells KTRH News.
Mr. Hayes is critical but stable. He received a 60% body surface burn. The plane landed in the muddy area, causing the plane to twist and turn, tearing off one of the wings. The plane then developed flames in the cockpit. He was able to kick out the paneling on the side to remove himself from the plane. He has no apparent injuries other than the burns, and these, as I stated, cover about 50% of his body surface.
Hayes, the lunar module pilot on the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, was flying a plane that belonged to the Confederate Air Force, and he said that the engine quit on him as he was trying to land. It's an important day for the Skylab astronauts. Today they will rehearse for tomorrow's scheduled spacewalk. The main task on the EVA will be to replace 6 of the 9 malfunctioning gyroscopes which stabilize the Skylab station in space. KTRH News Time now, 7:18. Buick.
Jr. is in critical condition at the John Seeley Hospital in Galveston. A plane that he was landing at Shoals Field late yesterday afternoon crashed. The engine quit. Hayes rode the plane down in a dead-stick landing. It was an old BT-13, a World War II single-engine trainer that belonged to the Confederate Air Force. Hayes received second-degree burns over 50% of his body. He was ferrying the old plane from Angleton Airport to Shoals Field at Galveston. President Salvador Allende.
From the World Desk of United Press International, this is Walt Wheeler. Good morning so far, and they have a go-ahead now for 7 more days in space, which is more than enough to pass the 28-day mark. They'll also be busy planning tomorrow's spacewalk. That may have prompted this comment from Alan Bean when he got his wake-up call this morning.
This thing is like a vacation up here. Every day is almost like a holiday. There's so many fun things going on.
Alan Bean with this morning's word from space.
The president will spend 3 hours today practicing for the spacewalk set for tomorrow. When it comes, the EVA will be used to replace some of the gyros that keep the Skylab vehicle steady. There has been a problem in that area. They're along with additional medical experiments.
Spacewalk tomorrow, and they have asked for extra time to run through the procedures for the walk, which is scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, Skylab Director William Schneider says that medical specialists have analyzed the progress of the astronauts and have given them a go-ahead to remain in space until at least Friday of next week. That will be the 35th day of the planned 59-day mission, and it will surpass by 1 week the spaceflight record of 28 days logged by the Skylab 1 crew last June. And as of now, the astronauts are less than 48 hours away from setting the endurance record in space. Tomorrow's spacewalk, they'll replace some faulty gyroscopes outside the giant space lab and change some film. Commander Alan Bean, meanwhile, says that thus far their space flight is, quote, like a holiday vacation.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From outer space, from Moscow, from Benton, Tennessee, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Round America's Skylab space station goes. For the astronauts, a thing of joy and beauty, says Mission Commander Alan Bean. Like a vacation up here, said he, adding, every day almost like a holiday. There are so many fun things going on. Also telling Mission Control, you guys are the ones that deserve the rest. You take the strain.
NBC News on the Hour. Attorney General Richardson expands a probe into alleged news leaks as Justice Department sources indicate some of the leaks may be coming from the White House. This is David Rush.
CBS News.
Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Right on the spacewalk tomorrow, beginning about 11 a.m. Eastern Time. They're scheduled to be out about 4 hours.
Themselves for tomorrow's planned spacewalk, David Crain has details.
The Skylab 2 astronauts spent 3 hours today rehearsing their spacewalk plan for tomorrow to replace the basic guts of the giant space station's faulty stabilization control system. And Alan Bean, Owen K. Garriott, and Jack Lausma aiming toward breaking man's spaceflight record of 28 days. Today's their 27th. The astronauts' second spacewalk is also designed for reloading film in the solar telescopes and making minor repairs on the observatory. The major task, though, is hooking up a special package of 6 gyroscopes that keep the 118-foot station in a stable orbit 270 miles above Earth. 6 of the 9 built-in control gyros in the station have malfunctioned. Ground controllers asked the pilots to install the package they carried to Skylab to prevent control problems with the station after the Skylab 2 crew leaves and before the last Skylab astronauts go up in November. One of the flight directors, Neil Hutchinson, says it's not too difficult task. He says it's about as easy as plugging in a lamp cord. I'm David Crain.
For their second spacewalk of the mission today, Owen Garriott and Jack Lausma will perform the outside duties of replacing 6 of the 9 gyroscopes which help in stabilizing the Skylab station in space. Alan Bean will remain inside to keep the orbiting space station on course. Garriott will also venture out to the solar observation instruments to put in some new film. The EVA is expected to last for about 4 hours. Former astronaut Fred Hayes, Jr. is still listed in critical but stable condition this morning as he continues trying to recover from 2nd and 3rd degree burns and from the inhalation of hot gases following a plane crash in Galveston 2 months ago. The Harris County Grand Jury has returned.
Astronauts are at work early this morning. The story in a moment. Space for the crew of Skylab. David Crain is at the Space Center.
The Skylab astronauts take a spacewalk today for a 6-pack. 6-pack referring to stabilizing gyros for the workshop. 6 of the 9 gyros have gone on the blink, and since the crew was scheduled to take a spacewalk today to replenish the film on the Apollo telescope mount, Mission Control decided it would be a good time to replace the defective gyros, which should be a relatively simple task. Commander Alan Bean will remain in the command service module, and if necessary, will use the CSM rockets to stabilize the workshop during the fix. The walk is scheduled to last about 4 hours. Later today, Bean, using a 35mm camera, will take pictures of an area near Nazca, Peru. The plains of Nazca, crossed by geometric patterns, have often been referred to as the airfield of the ancient astronauts. The source, the use of the pattern, has long mystified scientists. I'm David Crain.
CBS News, Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Owen Garriott and Jack Lausma right now are getting ready for a spacewalk. It's scheduled to begin a bit more than an hour from now.
It's 10 a.m. CBS News. Good morning. I'm Charles Osgood reporting on the CBS Radio Network. 10 minutes from now is running just a little behind schedule, maybe as much as an hour behind. But Jack Lausma and Owen Garriott have their spacesuits on, and over the last tracking station, Houston Mission Control gave them the following reminder.
Skylab, this is Houston. On your way out, don't forget to turn out the lights and turn off the air conditioning and close the door. Over. Okay, we will.
The spacewalkers will be replacing the gyro 6-pack that stabilizes the Skylab. 6-pack in there now hasn't been working very well. We'll have more news after this.
Walkers are about to go out the hatch. Here's more from Jay Barbary.
Astronauts Owen Garriott and Jack Lausma will step outside of Skylab, protected only by their Bucky spacesuits, to change solar telescope film and install a new 6-pack of gyroscopes to keep their space station stable in its orbit. Garriott and Lausma's job will be to connect cables and activate the gyro 6-pack that will replace a set of failing stabilizing instruments. Skylab Commander Alan Bean will remain inside Skylab, ready to control the orientation of the space station during the gyroscope transfer. The gyroscopes detect motion and relay this information which fires Skylab's control rockets to keep it on an even keel. If the spacewalk is successful, the new set of gyros will ensure the third and final Skylab flight, scheduled to begin in November. Jay Barbary, NBC News at the Kennedy Space Center.
This is news from American Contemporary Radio. I'm Joe Templeton in Washington. Food prices to keep going up. Details on that story in 60 seconds.
Time is 11 a.m.
CBS News, Richard C. Hartelet reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Now leaving their Skylab home about a half hour ago. They're expected to work for about 4 hours in space.
Are we making contact with Dave yet? Got the pot all the way open here. Well, we'll try and get Dave on there. I think we've got him on the line somewhere along the line. That's an important story coming out of there. The astronauts are walking in space. I'm still going to try it. And you hear me, Dave? There we are. How about now? All right. Well, we'll get a report from Dave in just a moment.
Yes, Howard.
Fine. Hear you coming loud and clear.
Okay. Well, Skylab astronaut Jack Lousman, Owen Garriott have been outside their workshop now for almost an hour, and they have several activities to perform. One of the most important, of course, is to hook up that gyro package. This is the stabilization part of Skylab, keep it in a direct mode. And 6 of the 9 gyros went out in the last few months that Skylab has been up, and they decided to replace them since a spacewalk had been scheduled at this time to replace some film in the Apollo telescope mount, or the instruments that help study the sun. And they got out a short while ago, and Jack Lousma, who's going to connect the gyro cord there, Rusty Schweikert, astronaut Rusty Schweikert, and flight director Neil Hutchinson say it's about as easy as plugging in a lamp, and apparently Lousma agrees.
Okay, Bruce, I'm sitting up here in the side of the docking adapter. Off to my right is their trusty command service module, and I'm facing the sun. The horizon is, Earth is upside down as I face it. Sun has just come up with a beautiful orange glow over the horizon, and the light blue band above that, and the darker blues, and fusing into the very, very black that's up here today and night. And I've got the cable clipped to the side of this box like Rusty showed us. I'm just sitting here waiting for it to get light to take this connector off. I can see it very dimly at the moment with the EVA lights. And I've already been up here and tried this out on our reconnaissance pass, and looks like I can get to the area and stabilize myself, no problem.
Pilot Jack Lousma saying no problem at all, and he's waiting for some daylight. Right now they're just over Guam, heading for the U.S., and they're in momentary darkness. They'll be coming out of it. They should be out for about another hour and a half, take care of things, come back in, go through a post-spacewalk period there, reporting what all they've done, back to mission control. Lots of activity still scheduled, and by the way, Howard, today is day 28. As of tomorrow, or later on today, they will set a new record for endurance in space, 29 days, and they still got a goal for 60. Howard?
Thank you very much, David. David Crain will have more reports direct from the Johnson Space Center today, and we'll be listening to you, David, at that time, all right?
Owen Garriott are outside the Skylab right now. They'll install a new set of gyroscopes to keep the Skylab on an even keel and reload some cameras used to study the sun. Houston Control says the spacewalk is going just fine. CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Jack Lousma has completed the installation of a series of new gyroscopes to maintain the attitude of the Skylab. As he plugged in a 23-foot cable, the big machine was allowed to drift, and Lousma reported his progress to the ground.
Okay, Bruce, I'm down here looking at WCIU with all these connectors, and I just got the victim loose. And in a few minutes, the good Lord willing, if the creek don't rise, we're going to have this hooked up.
The new gyroscopes now are in operation, and the stage is set for the astronaut Owen Garriott to replace and retrieve film from the solar telescope. More news in a minute.
CBS News, Douglas Edwards reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Lausma and Owen Garriott have completed the major part of their spacewalking mission. They've replaced those malfunctioning gyros with new ones. Now, as Commander Alan Bean watches from inside the Skylab, Lausma and Garriott must retrieve some film and perform a few more minor chores before calling it a day.
At the tone, 3 p.m. and time for CBS News.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Lausma and Garriott have been outside their Skylab now for 3.5 hours. Lausma has completed the hookup of spare gyroscopes, and they appear to be working as planned. Garriott is replacing film and experiments in the solar telescope, and he's been wrestling with an experimental door that has seemed to balk.
Build up more engine heat and a racing car going 3 times as fast. Heavy loads, turnpike speeds, and the power equipment in today's cars build up severe heat that may rob your motor.
For news from where it's being made, gathered by Network Radio's largest news staff, here is news around the world. This is George Caldwell for American Information Radio from New York. Garriott and Lausma have just completed an afternoon spacewalk. Garriott and Lausma installed new gyroscopes to keep Skylab tilted properly toward Earth and changed film in some exterior cameras.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. Astronauts walked in space today, and just like about everything that's happening to them, it went off without any trouble. Reed Collins reports. Jack Lausma connected a 23-foot cable outside the Skylab today and put the Skylab on a firmer course for the remaining months of its mission. From the time it was launched in May, the laboratory began losing gyroscopes that tell the computer of changes in attitude. This crew left Cape Kennedy with a 146-pound package of 6 spare gyroscopes and cable, and today they were put into use. Lausma having finished his job, his fellow spacewalker, Dr. Owen Garriott, proceeded to change the film in the solar telescope. Perched up on the barrel of the scope, which they call the ATM, Garriott was struck by what he saw.
Sitting up here on top of the ATM, you can see the horizon through a full 270-degree arc. There's a sun reflection out over the Pacific. We're just now crossing the Andes, coming across from the Pacific onto the South American coastline. And the Andes, a sharp relief down below with some cloud cover. It's just an utterly amazing view.
The spacewalk lasted 4 hours, 30 minutes, 30 seconds. The men sounded fresh when they had finished. There was never any clear reason, though, why Alan Bean substituted Lausma for himself for this outside work, except that Lausma is bigger and stronger. Measurements show the attrition of weightlessness. The men have lost nearly 1 inch around their calves, and they have a month to go in space. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
9 o'clock, stay tuned for the news.
This is George Caldwell for American Information Radio in New York with World Wrap-Up, the sounds of the news this August 24th, 1973. In the top of the news, federal charges dropped in New Orleans, and a federal judge rules against gas price restraints after September 1st. I'll have those and other stories in a moment.
Owen and Garriott spent 4.5 hours outside the Skylab space station, putting in a new set of gyroscopes and inserting new film into solar cameras. It was the second spacewalk of their mission. Tomorrow at 8:01 a.m. Eastern Time, the astronauts will set a new record for manned space flights, surpassing the 28-day mark established by their predecessors.
CBS News, Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Skylab crew's long spacewalk. David Crain has details.
Skylab astronauts performed what best could be described as a routine spacewalk. If spending 4.5 hours outside of their workshop, 270 miles above Earth, could be called routine. Jack Lausma and Owen Garriott hooked up a set of gyros to Skylab's computer to help keep the craft stable. And they replaced some film in the bank of cameras that are studying the sun. Flight Director Neil Hutchinson said it was a great day. We We got the new rate gyro 6-pack installed. It's already been, of course, it was turned on before they got back in. As a matter of fact, it looked so good after we turned it on that we put it in control before the crew had come back in from the EVA. And we are now flying on 6 new rate gyros with 3 old rack gyros as the 3rd gyro on each axis. And it looks great.
The Skylab astronauts closed out their 28th day, knowing on waking in the morning that will set a new time record for man in space, and the prospects look good for at least another 30 days. I'm David Crain.
12 midnight, stay tuned for the news.
Here's news of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour, Alan Bean's Skylab crew breaks the spaceflight endurance record in a few hours when it passes the 28-day mark. Another exploit is reported by correspondent John Pollock at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
If you can call a spacewalk routine, this one was. Astronauts Jack Lausma and Owen Garriott reported no trouble at all in 4.5 hours of work on the outside of Skylab. Jack Lausma connected a new set of gyroscopes to Skylab's computer. The gyroscopes tell the computer which way the space station is pointing, and just minutes after Lausma finished the job, flight controllers here at the Johnson Space Center reported they were working perfectly. Owen Garriott then changed the film in the Solar Observatory's cameras. Throughout the spacewalk, the astronauts had time for some sightseeing, observing 2 sunrises and 3 sunsets as Skylab whirled around the Earth. John Pollock, ABC News, Johnson Space Center.
For news from where it's being made, gathered by Network Radio's largest news staff, here is News Around the World. This is Steve Powers for American Information Radio with a good morning to you from New York.
This morning have orbited into history. Just after 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, they surpassed the space endurance record set by the first Skylab astronauts in June of 28 days and 50 minutes in orbit. At that time, the Skylab 2 astronauts had completed 404 trips around the Earth and had traveled more than 11.5 million miles. They'll more than double the old record if all goes well and they complete their 59-day mission. Their chances were enhanced yesterday when the astronauts went spacewalking and hooked up new gyroscopes to ensure the stability of the Skylab.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is David Garcia in Washington, and at this hour, a new record for spaceflight endurance. The Skylab 2 astronauts set it at 8:01 Eastern Time this morning. At that time, the astronauts had spent 28 days and 50 minutes in space. The mission is less than half over.
CBS News. Good morning. Neil Strasser reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts report themselves healthy and sure as heck happy as they orbit on into space history. They surpassed the space endurance record set by the first Skylab astronauts about 2 hours ago of 28 days and 50 minutes in orbit. Now it's 28 days, 2 hours, and 50-some minutes, and still not quite halfway to the planned 59-day mission. It was Commander Alan Bean who reported we're sure as heck happy. Neil Strasser, CBS News.
CBS News, Christopher Glenn reporting on the CBS Radio Network. These astronauts are now the longest-traveled spacemen in history, passing the mark set by the Skylab 1 crew this morning. Not much is on tap for the crew today. Ground control radioed up instructions for the rest of the day to Alan Bean.
We've got some off-duty periods scattered here and there, a little bit of housekeeping, showers, and about 2 hours when we have station passage for our status conference, and that's about it. Okay, that sounds good to us.
Completion of the full Skylab 2 mission of 59 days will more than double the old space endurance record of 28 days in orbit.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Lou Leslie from Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Phone 8 o'clock.
CBS News, John Meyer reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
On the CBS Radio, astronauts have now been in space longer than anyone in history. On Monday, they'll celebrate the halfway mark of their 57-day mission. The energy crisis seems to be reaching all the way up to their space station. Ground controllers saying that 17 main electrical batteries aboard Skylab have each lost 40% of power. Officials are puzzled. They aren't sure what's causing the power loss, but they say it's more of a nuisance now than a crisis. But they are concerned looking ahead to the last manned mission scheduled for launch November 10th. David Jackson, CBS News.
New space endurance record, bypassing the record of Skylab 1, 28 days, 49 minutes, and 49 seconds. In Dublin.
Exactly 9 a.m.
CBS News. Good morning. Neil Strasser reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
6 p.m.
CBS News, Christopher Glenn reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Astronauts today, Alan Bean, Owen Garriott, and Jack Lausma took it easy puttering around their space house with minor chores and ran some tests on the spaceship's batteries to see why they have a power shortage.
8 o'clock.
CBS News, Christopher Glenn reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Exactly 11 p.m.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Lou Leslie from Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour...
Spacecraft Center to Johnson Space Center. The official dedication ceremonies will begin at 3. Carl Kramer has the story.
This afternoon marks another big stage in the life of the space complex near NASA. Today, on the birthday of the late president, the center is officially dedicated as the Johnson Space Center for the man who supported it for so long. The ceremonies get underway at 3 o'clock this afternoon. That's according to Public Information Officer John McLeish.
The formal dedication ceremony itself will be open to invited guests only, and this numbers approximately 700 to 800 people.
The special guest at the ceremonies is the late president's wife, Lady Bird. She'll be speaking to the general public immediately after the formal ceremonies are finished. This is Carl Kramer.
The crew of Skylab 2 goes about business this morning as if nothing else were going on. So far, the astronauts have spent more time in space at one time than any other Earthlings. They have passed the halfway mark in their 59-day mission, and the doctors on the ground say it looks as if things are fine for a complete mission. They celebrated the milestone of their halfway mark last night by sleeping. In critical condition at John Seeley Hospital this morning. Fred Hayes Jr. is suffering from burns and hot gas inhalation. He was burned in the crash of a Confederate Air Force plane near Galveston last week. Doctors say while Hayes is alert and in good spirits, they are concerned about lung damage from the hot gas. They're feeling guarded.
CBS News, Douglas Edwards reporting on the CBS Radio Network. But Skylab astronaut Owen Garriott said the Spider has only managed to spin a couple of strands in her weightless environment, suggesting that Anita might be in better shape for the TV camera tomorrow. Okay was the reply from Mission Control, but tell her to get on the ball because the space agency doesn't tolerate prima donnas. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
PM. CBS News, Gary Shepard reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
7 p.m. and time for The World Tonight.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. The World Tonight, Monday, August 27th. This is Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Guam, from Damascus, from Teresita, Brazil, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Just routine. Astronauts Bean, Garriott, and Lausma performing a lot of functions today, toiling diligently in solar observation, conducting a number of biomedical experiments, further testing a one-man flying machine, and photographing a strange light they suddenly discovered in the Earth's upper atmosphere, all drawing a round of applause from the space scientists below. Dr. Edward Gibson observing that once Al and his crew got oriented, why, they went full bore.
CBS News, Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Well, midnight. Stay tuned for the news.
Here's news of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour...
71 degrees in Seguin, news on the hour presented by KWED Radio. It's 8 o'clock.
From the World Desk of United Press International, this is Craig Smith. Apparently, it's no easier to get up in space than it is here on Earth. Bob Honig reports from UPI Space Headquarters.
So that old alarm clock went off this morning, and all you wanted to do was roll over and go back to sleep, huh? Well, you're not alone. Skylab crew began their 33rd day in space this morning this way.
Skylab, Houston. COS for 5 minutes. And whenever you're ready to copy, we have several messages for you. You know, how soon do they apply to our operations here? 30 minutes, or have we got time to get out of bed?
And a good morning to you, too. Bob Honig at Space Headquarters in New York.
Bean, Garriott, and Lausma have medical experiments and sun-gazing on their agenda for today. The crew will also transmit a televised tour of their living quarters on this, the 33rd day of their 59-day mission. The Manned Spacecraft Center at Clear Lake has been formally dedicated in honor of the late former President Lyndon B. Johnson. We have details on the story from David Crain.
NASA Administrator Dr. James Fletcher said the ceremony was more than a dedication of the Manned Spacecraft Center to Lyndon Baines Johnson, but also to rededicate ourselves and NASA to achieving the peaceful uses of space which President Johnson saw for America and mankind. Mrs. Johnson said her husband would have been most appreciative of these ceremonies on this, his 65th birthday.
Giving his name to this great center, the KLBJ Space Center, dedicated to the peaceful exploration of space, is a birthday gift I know he would deeply appreciate. I thank all of you who have had a part in this wonderful commemoration of my husband's life and work. It is my prayer that God will guide and guard all who in future years make the journey toward the stars.
Johnson Space Center Director Dr. Christopher C. Kraft presented Mrs. Johnson with a flag carried to the moon on Apollo 11. I'm David Crain.
CBS News, Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. From Hyderabad, Pakistan. From Orizaba, Mexico. From Stockholm comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Astronauts. How much more can people tell of the Earth's resources from 200 miles up there, he asks, than right down here? Spending in billions in such a way, he continued, is simply asinine, and he adds, I am all for space exploration, but we seem intent on making it less meaningful than a soap commercial. That's quite a letter. But Dr. Weatherin, Skylab Earth Resources studies, so I hear, are already proving of inestimable value, not only in scientific research, but also in dollars and cents. From their vantage point in space, the Skylab astronauts command a broad sweep of the Earth's surface with the help of super-sensitive cameras and other special instruments, and they spot vast mineral deposits hitherto unknown, tracking down faults that could lead to an early earthquake warning system, detecting crop blights in their early stages before having a chance for the blights to spread, determining the full scope of air and water pollution, helping chart the growth of our metropolitan centers to improve urban planning, and so on. The list almost endless. Prior to the U.S. and Russian space programs, more than half of the Earth's land surfaces were unmapped, virtually unexplored. Many, in fact, still are. As you may have heard...
NBC News on the Hour. Mexican earthquake death toll reaches more than 425. In Massachusetts, the death toll from the tornado has breached 4. I'm Mark Henry.
11 o'clock.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Richard Wall from Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Good Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
Skylab mission will today conduct some map-making photographs of Paraguay and perform more medical tests. Bean, Garriott, and Lausma are also due to test again a pair of jet shoes inside the Skylab workshop. Finally, former astronaut Fred Hayes Jr. remains in critical condition this morning, and doctors say that he will continue being listed so for about 2 more weeks as Hayes recovers from burns suffered in a plane crash last week. Dr. Dwayne Larson of Galveston's John Seeley Hospital says that Hayes is in excellent spirits and that skin grafts are being considered to overcome the problem of Hayes burns.
At the tone 5 p.m. and time for CBS News.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. KTRH CBS News, Mitchell Krause reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
11 o'clock.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Richard Wall from Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
At the tone 5 p.m. and time for CBS News.
CBS News, this is Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. This brings the news from Nampang Air Base, Thailand. From Canitra, Morocco, from Recife, Brazil, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. In space, so announced by Skylab Program Director William Schneider. This approval, said he, following a review of in-flight medical data, also at the recommendation of NASA Director of Life Sciences, Dr. Charles Berry. Officials adding that the flight will probably continue on a week-to-week basis as long as no health problems arise. In the meantime, the Skylab astronauts were training their telescopes today
on the Milky Way in an attempt to learn more about the stars and the value of astronomical observations from manned spacecraft.
NBC News on the Hour. President Nixon's refusal to comply with a court order to produce White House tapes is legal, according to a former Attorney General. I'm Mark Henry reporting.